Hi, I think we might as well get started. We'll let a few people trickle in while we do. But hi, my name is Roxanne Kamsey, and I'm a science journalist. I'm also the news editor of Nature Medicine, which is a biomedical research journal. And there's a sound. I think that might be telling people to come in here. I have a soundtrack. I've always wanted one. So I want to thank everyone, including our panelists, for being part of this discussion today about the database tools that we use in our reporting, which I use every day. I'm sure a lot of people in this room do too. And I want to also thank the World Conference of Science Journalists and the Association of Healthcare Journalists for making this possible for us to have this discussion. I also want to remind people that this session is being recorded. It's on the record. And you are very welcome to take out your laptops to follow along, because both of our presenters are going to be doing some demos, and I know that I like to learn as people show things, so feel free to do that as well. So there are tons of health databases out there that I use in my reporting, and other people do too. And what I would do is, since we can't cover them all here, this conference hashtag, if you check it out, you'll see a list that more than a dozen science writers contributed to. There's at least 20 different databases linked there. So I encourage you to check that out, and I really want to thank the people that helped compile that list. So we're very lucky today to have leaders from two of the most prominent troves of information. Robert Logan is a senior staff member of the National Library of Medicine and a professor emeritus at the University of Missouri School of Journalism. He is the editor of the first book on international health literacy research to be published this winter, but I found out about 3 minutes ago that it came out last week. So congratulations, Rob, about that, and maybe you could tell us a bit more about that. And so for those of you who might not know, the National Library of Medicine is the engine behind PubMed. And I know that my life changed when, as a science reporter, I discovered that if you want to narrow your search to a certain journal, all you have to do is put a square bracket and JO and another square bracket. And I felt like a little extra happy that day. So hopefully we'll learn some more tools. And thank you, Rob, for being here. We also have Anurag Acharya, who's co-creator of Google Scholar and a distinguished engineer at Google. Anurag has a bachelor's in computer science from the Indian Institute of Technology in Kharagpur and a PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon. You took a year off from teaching at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and came to Google to work on indexing, essentially making information easier to find with web searches. And after 4 years, you took a sabbatical to focus with a colleague on making scholarly articles easier to find, and out of that, Google Scholar was born, and I think we're all very happy that that happened. So before we dive in, and I hope this is a discussion, I just wanted to ask you both if you could sum up in a sentence maybe what motivates you to educate users, such as us, science writers, about how to access medical facts and data and research online. So like in a sentence, like what are you hoping to get from this? What motivates you to tell us about these tools?
Personally, because I found them so useful myself in the past, okay? To me, I can't imagine, or put it this way, I was embarrassed when I started my career as a science writer about my own inability to contextualize things.
So context, and we make tools sometimes because we like to use them ourselves. That's great. Do you mind actually bringing the mic closer also? Because I think since we're recording this, we want to...
Sorry.
Yeah. So do you want to say a word about that?
Yes. I grew up in a place where information had strong geographical boundaries. You had to travel to places 3 hours away to be able to look up a library. Today, it's possible for all of us to get the world's library at your fingertips. I would like everybody to take advantage of it.
That's great. So geography and kind of making information actually just easier to reach out to. That's fantastic. I actually had a job at a library in college, and professors would tick off which papers they wanted me to photocopy, but these tools just became available in PDF, so nobody knew, but I would just kind of print the PDFs, and then, we didn't have cell phone games that time, but I'm sure I found something fun to do. As just a show of hands, do folks mind raising their hand just to let us know if you've ever used PubMed or Google Scholar? So raise them high. Okay, so people have used these tools, which is great. And if you've not used these tools, this is a great introduction to that. The last question I'll ask before we get started, would anybody be willing to share like an example of something that they have searched in these? I know journalists, we can be shy sometimes, so I understand if no one wants to, but does anyone want to shout out a word that they've Googled or put in Google Scholar or in PubMed? Yeah. Olfaction. Olfaction. I smell a good story. Sorry. I also have a bad pun, penchants for bad puns. Any others before we get started? E-cigarettes. E-cigarettes. Oh my God, very hot topic. Lots of different studies coming out. Okay, so we're using these tools, which is great. So I think it's time we get into demo mode or presentation mode. So Rob and Anurag are both going to spend about 20 minutes each, 25 minutes each, to take us on a guided tour of both the basic and the advanced aspects of these tools, and then we'll get into a discussion. In the interest of time, I'm going to stand up to give a cue a few minutes before the end of the talk. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Rob.
Okay. Again, I'm going to talk much more about using NLM's resources as a whole rather than actually zeroing in on PubMed, okay? I'm happy to answer questions later. I'll be here for a day in case you have anything specifically you want to ask me. I thank the Association of Healthcare Journalists for organizing this session. It's always a pleasure for me to return to San Francisco. It occurred to me the other day I've been here 40 times, 40 as an adult. That's amazing, considering I've never lived here. Unfortunately, they closed my favorite pizza place, which is about 3 blocks from here. I was mad as hell when I discovered that last night. It's fun also to address such a diverse, interesting group. I speak for myself. I do not speak for the National Library of Medicine. I do not speak for the National Institutes of Health. I have no conflict of interest to report. Our lawyers require that we discuss the latter two things. Topics briefly, I'll give you a brief context about NLM, a brief context about biomedicine's semi-unique characteristics as a discipline, a little bit about what's on the horizon for our more advanced users in the room, and we're going to go through, I hope, a sample search. Serendipitously, Roxanne and I discovered we did exactly the same search on August 30th of this year, and so we'll go back and show you how we did that. First, a couple of words from our sponsors, plural. The URLs on the screen are NIH's, the National Institutes of Health's press services. You're certainly welcome to use them. And this is the entrance of the U.S. National Library of Medicine. The National Library of Medicine, I'm going to refer to it as NLM, is one of 27 institutes and centers within the National Institute of Health. So we're very much a part of NIH. We're the only division of NIH that is not disease-specific. Everybody else has a disease or condition specificity. We're not. And the mission of NLM is succinct and very clear, about as clear as a mission statement as I've ever seen. It's on the screen. NLM does not originate most medical and public health research. That's a common misunderstanding. We actually originate very little of it. We organize and distribute it, mostly via the internet. Our tradition is to distribute evidence-based research that's reviewed by international medical and public health journals with comprehensive standards. Usually that's set by the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, of which we're very much a part. Our websites contain no advertising and they are free, thanks to politicians in the early 1990s. We do not provide medical advice. We remain the primary source for healthcare providers worldwide, although sometimes we feel like I'm in competition with folks to my left. Which, by the way, I used extensively to do the book that you heard about before, so thank you. And we're by far the largest medical library on Earth. In fact, we're one of the largest libraries of any kind on Earth. And we're also, and this surprises people quite often, we're actually a home base for students and faculty in 5 major disciplines, okay, the disciplines that are on the screen. Most people think of a library as a collection of books and a place to study. Sure, we've got books, periodicals, and we've got quiet places that if you want to go read, but that has absolutely nothing to do with us. We've been an educational institution for more than 180 years. Biomedicine as a discipline is almost unique, almost. First of all, its knowledge is organized. Index Medicus, believe it or not, started in the middle of the 19th century by some very forward-thinking people, and was unique in all the world when it started. Its knowledge today is digitized. Index Medicus was digitized into what we today call PubMed. Okay? PubMed had predecessors, which often confuses people who learned to use the earlier versions of it. But the predecessors, the key thing is, it started in the 1970s, not the 90s, the 70s. And for all of you who have a sense of history, you know immediately how far ahead of everybody that the folks who started this in the 1970s were. Even envisioning digitizing something as mammoth at that time, that was hard to envision when there were no personal computers and no internet, okay? I won't go into more detail about it, but really is a remarkable story all in itself. Knowledge is accessible on the web. Some knowledge is free and accessible on the web. What do I mean by that? I mean it's something that I think all of you already know, but let's just say it plainly, okay? About 20% of articles that are in PubMed are available full text for free, okay? That means that 80% are behind a paywall, and I think that's something a lot of you have experienced. About 40% of the articles are available full text for free that have been published in the last 5 years. So the trajectory, okay, is in the right direction, but still, it's going to take a long time to catch up. Here's what I suggest in the interim. And by the way, I have this problem whenever I leave the office. I had 3 or 4 hours ago when I was upstairs, okay? What I strongly suggest to all of you is, I do not know about the other organizations that are co-sponsored to this meeting. It may very well be the same case. But if you're a member of the Association of Healthcare Journalists, you get extensive access as part of your membership to the 80% that's beyond a firewall. You get Science Direct and Up to Date and several other services as part of your membership. And believe me, when I'm not in the office, I take advantage of that all the time, and I encourage you all to do so. Again, it may be the same thing in the National Association of Science Writers and several other groups. If so, great, but that's what you need to do in order to get the rest of it. I recommend that route much more than Eastern European portals, and I'm not going to say what they are, okay? Don't ask me, okay? I have absolutely no response to that. But nevertheless, I believe that there's a way out for all of you who felt shut out. And by the way, I understand your feelings on that subject. Some research peer critiques in biomedicine occur quite openly. In our case, it's on PubMed Commons. Some is on Retraction Watch. I think Ivan Oransky will be here over the next couple of days. Is that right, Len? Okay, good. And there are also a number of other services. It's pretty easy to see people in biomedicine these days critique one another, which, by the way, wasn't true just a few years ago. Now, the headline back here said it's almost unique, because I know I'm in the room with people who write about physics and write about astronomy and write about molecular biology. If you write about all those things, you already know that open access in those 3 fields especially is still far ahead of biomedicine. Biomedicine is still catching up, okay? But it's still come a very long way in very little time. Here are our primary resources that I believe will help you. All of them are free, non-commercial, and evidence-based. At minimum, okay, you can use these resources if you want to contextualize a complicated health or medical topic, as I've said in the answer I gave at the beginning. At minimum, you can find out who's done similar research to anything you're looking at. At minimum, you can find out about what authors have published in the past very easily. At minimum, you can find out about any clinical trial that's going on in the world at any time, and you can get now the results of many of them, although not all. And you can find out things very easily, like conflict of interest. The reason why I recommend my NCBI to all of you, I'm not going to ask because I don't want to embarrass you, but those of you who haven't signed up for it, I beg you to do so. All you do is put my NCBI in any search engine and you'll get to the site. That allows you to sign up for specific topics, and once you do that, we alert you in the future when anything new happens. You get an email sending you an alert. Essentially, and again, most people use that to put in serious health, biomedical and health-related and public health topics, and of course, I do the same. But you'd be surprised sometimes what pops up if you put something else in there. For example, I know one journalist well who put Major League Baseball in there 10 years ago at a lark. And he discovered that he was getting 5 or 6 stories sent to him a year about research that had something to do with Major League Baseball, which gave him 5 or 6 exclusives every year. And he's joking me ever since, I can't believe nobody else ever figured this out. A woman who in the audience, when he said that publicly at an AHCJ meeting about 5 years ago, told me that she immediately put ballet in there, had never thought about it. She was a former ballerina, and she said, I get 8 stories a year at least, having something to do with ballet. So you don't necessarily have to put olfactory in there, okay? You'd be surprised, okay? Try a few that you wouldn't expect. You may end up with some stuff that you'd be very surprised. You put in weekend, don't you? Okay, all right. Anyway, it's quite surprising sometimes what you can find other than the stuff that again is directly related to what you're doing. On the horizon, a few moments for the most advanced users in the room. And I'm afraid I can only do this very briefly. You can expect to see author plans for data sharing within articles starting next summer. That's because of the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors policy, which came out in June in this year. That will change a lot once it gets started. Again, I don't think you're going to start seeing it until next summer. I think June was the deadline where they put on all their members. Data sets, and here's the big one, or one of the big ones. As a matter of fact, come to think of it, this is the big one. You can expect to see authors add data sets within PubMed Central articles starting this winter. They're going to trickle in. It's going to be no avalanche, okay? For those of you who have a long career ahead of you, 10, 15, 20 years, and I hope for many of you, as long as you want, you're going to discover that during the course of your career, that's going to become more and more and more common. But it will start very slowly. I can't go in, don't have time to go into detail about why that's transformative, but it is. You're going to be able to see the entire data set very often that people used. The findings that are published are what? A tiny subset of the entire data set. That changes fundamentally the transparency of research. Best match. Best match is the substitute inside of PubMed for the algorithm we used to call relevance. I think that a lot of you will find that best match works a heck of a lot better than relevance does, okay? And something that I highly recommend that you use. And then now, another one that really might make a difference to many of you. NIH now supports preprints, much to my surprise. Their announcement came out in March, and Howard Hughes had a similar announcement at the same time, and so did the Wellcome Trust, which is kind of the troika, okay, all acknowledging or accepting them for the first time. Preprints is essentially research that has not been peer-reviewed, but still made available on websites. It's similar to conference papers that have not gone through a review process that I'm sure all of you are used to. It's already common in biology to have preprints, but believe me that it's going to certainly morph from biology to many, many, many other disciplines soon. So what does that mean to you? That means in the near future, on a variety of websites that I'm not going to get into at this time, okay, you're going to be able to see work in progress in many disciplines. The key for you to remember is what you're seeing, okay, is before it's been peer reviewed. When it's published in a major journal, okay, it might be different. I would assume in many cases it will be. I do not know, and anticipate a question, will we and other NIH activities eventually, will we put, for example, preprints on PubMed? We have no plans to do that at the moment, but I can't look in a crystal ball and absolutely promise you that that'll never happen. It depends on how well accepted they are. But that changes your job, I think, in the future. You can also, by the way, Nature had a very, excuse me, I made a mistake. Science had a very good article 2 weeks ago on preprints. If you didn't see it, it's on the screen. You can expect significant changes in medical publishing. The way medical publishing is today may be very different 2 or 3 years from now. And I think just about everybody in it agrees to that. I think people are nervous about the changes that are happening to accommodate open access, but whatever we have and whatever we're used to now, I think is going to change very significantly as these challenges occur. But no, I'm not going to predict exactly what's going to occur. All right, now let's do a sample run through if we can. I hope I can do this. Let's see. Let's start, okay, with on August 30th of this year, okay, both Roxanne and I received a press release. She got an Eureka alert. I got mine from Novartis and got it from the FDA, of the first cancer gene therapy treatment for acute lymphoblastic leukemia that was resistant to chemotherapy that had been approved by the FDA. So that, and both of us agreed for different reasons at the time that that was a very good story, okay? Inside the press releases itself, okay, several names were provided, okay, but the key thing that would make it very easy to find on clinicaltrials.gov, which is the NCT number, was not. That's always very annoying. Finding the NCT number is always the key, makes it much easier to use clinicaltrials.gov. And every time I'm with a pharmaceutical person who's in, I try to sit down with them and say, would you please, we'll take you an extra 6 seconds to put the NCT number in, and they know what it is, okay? Please put it in there. And of course, I'm encouraging the people I know who work at major news organizations to link from that and the stories that they do. But we'll see, we're still not there yet. So we had no choice, both of us. If you searched under Chimera, you wouldn't get anything. If you searched on the second one, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, you didn't get much. But fortunately, there was one technical term that was there, CTL019. If you searched on that in clinicaltrials.gov, then boom, things popped up. In fact, what happened there was you got about 35 different studies that were along those lines. Okay. And what you're seeing here is, let me see if I can show this to you. I don't think I can, but what in the list, okay, in clinicaltrials.gov, very long list of about, I think there were about 40 studies that were there. There was only one that it said published has results, okay, completed has results. As it turned out, okay, there was enough information under completed has results that as you discovered right away, that the folks mentioned in the press release also were the folks that were also mentioned under completed as results. What both of us did is we clicked on, okay, which is near the bottom of the page, okay, then this, and this is the page you got to when you clicked on completed as results, okay, inside of clinicaltrials.gov. And I'm going to do this slowly, okay, because there's a great deal of information here about the trial, as there are about all of them, okay? But again, I'm going to go through this now, go to the bottom, because really what both of us were looking for was down here, way at the end, okay? Again, you find all kinds of information about the trial, who was included, who was excluded, the locations, and many other things, and this is very typical of the reporting of findings. The completed and has results part, okay, and I've scrolled all the way to the bottom of the page, okay, and it's again under CTL019. And the reason we went down here is under more information is a lot of the information that you need in order to dive. Here's what that page looks like, okay? The study is completed, it has results, it provides the purpose of the study, it provides the various conditions and the intervention. This is, again, by the way, only a phase 1 study. It's rare, by the way, in case you didn't know, to see a phase 1 study published inside of clinicaltrials.gov. That tells you something right away, okay? It gives you the secondary outcome measures, the arms, and the primary objectives. That may be fine if you wanted to write a lot about this particular study, but for our purpose, we wanted to learn more about CTL 019, about why the FDA approved it, okay? And to find that out, went to the bottom, okay? It turned out that Noel Fry, the Edwardson Center, is mentioned on one of the press releases, so we knew immediately that's the same person, okay? And here, okay, we immediately have something of value. They've actually published an article based on this data in the New England Journal of Medicine, and here's the link to it, okay? So we knew immediately that we had a place to go to get information about the study and information about all the authors. Now, there are two more things that are important here that I want to show you. Besides the responsible party, who is the university's primarily in charge of that is given there, and this is standard. Here's where the NCT number is, in case you can't find it. Okay, it's down here. And then at the bottom here is the most useful thing that I know that most journalists don't use, and I encourage you to, the medical subject heading terms, okay, that are listed for this particular disease or condition. The reason that's so useful is if you search under MESH rather than PubMed, you have a totally different way to search by topic, okay? Totally different experience, okay? And so I always keep a hand of MESH terms, okay? I always search under MESH rather than PubMed whenever I want to know more about a specific topic. And it's very useful. But let's click on this now, the actual article itself, and hopefully it'll pop up, and it does, thank goodness, okay? Here's the actual page in PubMed, the abstract for this article. Now, what do we know immediately once we open this up? Both of us knew immediately we could see the number of authors, some of whom were mentioned in the press release. For example, Dr. June, where the arrow is right now, was mentioned in the press release. I'm not going to do it now, but if I pressed on that, I would see much of the research that she's done during her career, instantly, okay? You get the abstract, complete, okay? But what's really valuable is on the right side of the page. Here, okay, this tells you that you can get this full text link from New England Journal of Medicine. You can get that in the United States, but if I were presenting to you in Scotland, which I did about 3 weeks ago, okay, you couldn't get it there. So that wouldn't show up, but PMC PubMed Central would. So this article is actually available for free in 2 different places, but you can't, depending on where you are in the world, you can't depend on anything but if it's available in PubMed Central. But what's really important, which I don't think a lot of folks know, see this blue area here where it says review? What's that? Somebody knows, I'm glad, okay? Those are systematic reviews about this area, okay? What are systematic reviews? The state-of-the-art evidence, okay? This is from PubMed Health, one of our sites that covers only systematic reviews and comparative effectiveness research, okay? Whenever you see that blue box, okay, on the right side of the page, you know instantly, instant context, okay? You can immediately, I'm not going to click on it now, but you can immediately find out, okay, immediate access for free, okay, to an article that provides context in this particular area. Now, what else is here? Let's see. How do you determine conflict of interest? You can't do that on this page. What you do is you open up the article itself. Because of the rules now in most major journals in recent years, conflict of interest material is given, and usually on the first page or at the end of the article for just about in most cases. I can't absolutely guarantee it's there all the time, but it frequently is, and it's now required by the International Committee of Medical Journal Articles. The DOI could be useful, that's down here, but also here, boy, this computer's difficult to use. Down here, over here is the NCT number, okay? Again, another place. And it turns out this one, tells you this is actually one of 2 ranges of studies, and it gives you the other NCT number, so you can see even more. So instantly here, okay, you've got an enormous amount of information about how this work was done, okay, and about and also about all the authors, and also about the overall topic. If you go into medlineplus.gov, which is our site for consumers, okay, I'm going to actually try now deliberately to make this easier, and search under ALL, that's the name of the condition. You hit go, okay, you can search on any disease or condition here, please work. You get a page that looks like this. If it says the name of condition, National Library of Medicine, as it does on the screen, that tells you automatically that there's a health topic page about this disease or condition. The health topic page is where you want to be every time. There are more than 1,000 of them, so it covers just about everything. If I click on this, then I get a page written for consumers. It's in English and Spanish, okay, that provides very basic information, summaries, start here, diagnosis, treatments. It gives you links to clinicaltrials.gov, and it gives you links also to journal articles inside of PubMed. But the key link here is at the very top, where it says general information about adult acute lymphoblastic leukemia, National Cancer Institute. I wish this were labeled better. But whenever you see general information about, okay, in any cancer, and it says the National Cancer Institute, that is the patient page inside of Physician Data Query, okay, in the National Cancer Institute that they have prepared. There is no better source in the world of basic information about cancer and diseases, okay, than the National Cancer Institute's patient information and provider information. And it's very easy to toggle from this page to see the provider information. Everything there is evidence-based, everything's usable, it is redone several times a year. It is about as reliable as anything I've ever seen in my life. By the way, I've said this in public many times, I wish every medical institution in the world, I wish all the other institutes in NIH did this same thing. They don't, okay? It's only the National Cancer Institute that does this. But again, the key thing here is that you can very easily from Medline Plus, okay, if that is there, general information about, you know immediately that you can go to the PDQ site inside the National Cancer NCI's work, which is excellent. There was also mentioned to you, I can do this very briefly, I hope, a second approval of another second FDA approval of gene therapy last Wednesday, okay? And that one, again, the similar scenario, the information given and the press releases did not contain the NCT number, but it did contain a number similar to the one I used that enabled you to search immediately on clinicaltrials.gov. Once you search there, you discovered, and you will if you search now, that there's no study that has completed results. So the result is the experience that I showed you isn't there. But here's a case where being simple sometimes works, okay? If you searched on non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, okay, inside of Medline Plus, you would get to NCI's page on this, okay? And then even better, okay, if you searched on Yescarta, which was the name of the intervention that was given in the releases, you would also get to NCI's information about that drug, which was published and put up 4 days ago. So again, sometimes the simpler approach sometimes can even be better than PubMed. Sorry, the computer didn't work better.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Rob. I think even with the computer glitch, I learned a lot, and I think the NCT number is now going to be something I'm going to pay more attention to going forward. So thank you so much. Anurag, would you like to give this a whirl?
I'd like to thank the association and Roxanne, of course, for giving me the opportunity to meet an audience that I've never had an opportunity to talk to, whose output I have read many times with much pleasure. For once, I get to do the talking. What I would like to talk about is something that I've spent now 13, 14 years working on, a segue which is supposed to be a short detour, which has occupied the rest of my life. I'll talk about the kinds of, a little bit of background as to what Google Scholar tries to do to give you a little bit of feel for what the tool is. And then we'll dive directly in, picking specific kinds of tasks that you may want to do. And we will go through a little bit of detail. Hang on, let me get my cheat sheet so that I remember to cover the various knobs and bells that are built in. Scholarly search has usually been fragmented. Every discipline makes its own, because every discipline, of course, is different, which is true. But the fragmentation limits the ability for people to gather knowledge. It's limited by where the articles are published. Only if you are blessed to be published in the right place would the work be found. It's often also limited by area and country. PubMed is a fantastic example that is not. But many others are. Around the world, there are many databases, scholarly databases, that are bound in that way. Only if you're well represented or if you're well known will you be found. The position we started Scholar from is that the ability to find the result of research must be comprehensive. If your colleagues have discovered something somewhere in the world, you, as a researcher who's trying to solve problems, should be able to find it. There are many reasons for it. The obvious one is multidisciplinarity. People are no longer as limited to a specific domain as they used to be. To be able to do well, you need to know not just what you're working on, but the related areas. It's also obvious, except for those who close their eyes, that insights are not limited to those who are well-funded. Example shows the Green Revolution was started in places not in Europe, not in the US, not in Western Europe. It fed me and fed everybody else. There are major challenges facing all of us. Challenges that have been with us and challenges that we are explicitly and with all due effort creating for ourselves. But there are also major opportunities, which is what I referred to when Roxanne asked me the question. We are better connected. We are not isolated. If problems can spread, so can the insights, so can the discoveries. This can only happen if everybody everywhere can see what everybody else has done, if we are all building the same cathedral of science. That's what our goal for Google Scholar is. One place to find all scholarly literature, all areas, all languages, and all time. And for it to be free to all users, so that if something's being learned by your colleagues somewhere, you should be able to find it. A number to make ourselves think about what's possible is if we could improve the global researcher productivity 10%, think about what cumulative impact you might possibly have. Where are we? Today, Scholar is the largest scholarly search on earth. It covers all areas in all languages that have significant scholarly publication and covers all the way back to the first papers in the Royal Society. Covers journals, conferences, books, preprints, theses, reports. Knowledge comes in many forms. That's where I end my framing. And now we'll dive into what we can do, have fun, play. Hang on, before I go. This is something that most people don't know about Scholar. I've asked this question to most avid Scholar users. Did you know we are the primary providers of free case law in the United States? And to almost every last person, say, what is that? Even though that stares you in your eyes on the home page as an explicit button. It's an object lesson in UI blindness when you think about how to design your own site. The point we ended up here, just like in science, law governs our lives. However, law is not available, even though it's supposed to be publicly available as a part of US government output, it was not publicly available. We built a service that would let you find using normal terms and then to read it. And now, as I promised, we will jump into the details. So I said, what kinds of operation might be interesting to an audience which is in some sense unique for Scholar? There's short bursts of intense interest when you're researching a story. Usually the topic is not very familiar. There's of course the possibility that you're following a story over a long period of time. You're telling a story, you're not just telling your own story, you're telling the story of people who did the research, who are going to talk about it. You need to look for experts. And finally, I'll talk about showing some amount of case law. And I have some queries lined up to help me show. Stem cell. You do a query, this is a broad query, this is an example of a topic that you want to look into. The top results you will see will be the iconic, most well-known results in the area. You see, the title goes usually to the abstract so that you can quickly scan what this article is about. On the right-hand side, you notice linked, marked PDF or HTML. Those are versions of that article that you, searching there, will be able to read. So the full article, if there is a version that you, searching from this particular machine, are able to read, those are the ones that appear on the right-hand side. So this, if you're searching for stem cell, clearly you don't probably know much about them. It's a fairly broad description of a very large area. So can we do anything to help you dive deeper into this topic? And so we actually compute the suggestions. You may have seen suggestions in Google and most other search services. Most of those are based on people who searched for this also searched for that. These, however, are based on trying to go from a broad topic into more specific topics. As you can see, we can go down a couple to get a feel for what they are like. And you will notice, initially, you are trying to become more specific. You're adding additional terms to a broad topic. As you go down, as you will notice, we become very specific. Your query is tied down, is very detailed. Then you already probably know what it is you're looking for. Then rather than trying to make you go more specific, we allow you to explore the neighborhood in the concept space. So both for things that you are not familiar with and things that you may have just become familiar with or some things that you have long been familiar with. The mechanisms to explore the concept space to form the right queries, which is always a challenge in scholarship because every field has its own sublanguage, its own terminology. The few other things you can do, obviously to look, the top results are usually the canonical results, the ones that establish the fields or the ones that are most popular. You may not want those. You can look for more recent ones. You can look for related articles, which is an interesting component which often allows you to jump across terminology. Things that did not talk about this topic using these terms, but use some completely different terms. Actually, in many cases, they will also jump across language boundaries. If there are papers in other languages talking about the same topic, related articles is often able to bring them up. The one final thing I wanted to mention, this is just a convenience. You notice these stars. Okay, that's going to be complicated. Let me not do that. There's a way of being able to create a small little scholar just for yourself. By clicking on those stars, you're saving those articles. Once you save those articles, you're able to then search over them, apply all the magic that Scholar has over your collection. So the same ranking, the same features over your own collection. The next one is an example of a topic. I just picked some terms that seemed relevant or interesting to me that you may already be familiar with. So then what are you looking for? You're looking to maybe keep up with this. The simplest thing is to basically create an alert. You notice that the alert query that's created is actually different from what we started out with. You just said guinea worm, whereas this gives you a different query. Yes, please. Yes. What we try to do is to create a query that will yield the same kind of results as the results that you saw when you created this query in the first place. Because when you're looking at all papers across all time, you can find which papers are probably the most interesting or the most likely to be useful. For stuff that's just been published in the last week, not all of them are likely to be useful enough. They might just mention that term somewhere in the paper and may not be worth your while. So you try to create a query that would yield results just like the results that you liked, except on the smaller corpus, which may not have as much density. The other interesting thing to look for in terms of recent follow-ups to canonical papers is cited by. You can see who cited them, and then you can search within them to say, okay, who cited them in the last 3-4 years? Or who cited them within the last 3-4 years and talked about antibiotics in the context of, well, this is gone off, sorry. One of the papers citing that initial landmark study since 2013 talk about antibiotics. So all the research that follows on from that initial work that is limited to a specific scope or that explores a particular direction. Another common thing is to look for experts. So how do we make it easy to do that? Look at the first result. You will notice the first result, you see some authors. Some of the authors are actually links. Let's click on one. It brings you up to a profile of the author that the author has created. It lists all of their publication. It also lists what they identify as their expertise or interests. You click on that, and voila, you get a list of people who have self-identified themselves as people who are experts or interested. It's their choice in that area. And on the right-hand side, you see how often they are cited. People who are cited very widely are likely to be experts that their peers have recognized. You can also get, as you do this, you get lots of other terms. You get rheumatology, immunology, immunotherapy, and onwards. You can explore each of them to zoom in for the kind of expertise that you're looking for. You go back to this, you can look at specific papers, you can get the recent papers. You can see how well their work has been regarded over time. You can also follow their work. You can be notified when this author published new work, but more interestingly, you can also be notified when there is new work related to that area. Because maybe you found one expert, but that one expert is not the only thing you're looking to follow. You're looking to follow this whole direction of research that this person does. I'm down to my last one.
Great.
So this is looking at switching over into the non-scientific legal part of the space. I'm as yet just doing the normal query, greenhouse gas emission in Scholar. What you see are scholarly articles. Now to go over, you click on this hamburger menu, it gives you a set of choices. One of them is case law. And boom, you get Massachusetts versus EPA, which is carbon dioxide, a pollutant. There are a few features that are interesting to look at, especially for non-legal users. First is to look at how cited. In common law countries, case law is used to argue in other cases. I'm deciding this case this way because this other precedential opinion has established the following. By looking at all of those arguments, we can figure out what impact this case has had on the jurisprudence. What has this case been used to establish? What do people use this to argue? That is usually a good summary for those of us who are not lawyers. That's actually how I test whether my ranking works well. So by looking at any of these things, or you can, for example, take a very different query, and then that usually becomes even simpler. Police stop. Click on how cited for Terry versus Ohio. It tells you exactly when a police officer is allowed to stop you. The other component that's interesting often in case law is different from science in a very basic way. In science, truth can be elaborated on, but can usually not be reversed. In law, that truth is malleable. What's decided today or for 100 years can be overturned by Citizens United. So people want to know, what is the current state of the law? What is this discussed? How can I find things that discuss these things recently? Two things we do. The ranking is in law, case law is different from scholarship to take the malleability into account. Recency is far more important in case law than in scholarship. Second, as you see in those search results, you will notice in legal results, there are these bars. In these cases, 3 bars to the left of every search result. You pick something else, you will notice there are different set of bars. What that points out in the citing things is this case discussing the original cited case in a significant way? It may be overturning it, it may be differentiating, saying, here's a way in which the original thing doesn't apply, or here are the cases in which it does or does not apply. So the level of discussion is significant in the context of case law and is explicitly presented in a visual way over there. You can pick, yes, I am almost done. One thing to show, You can pick the courts. In scholarship, usually what is true here is also true in Massachusetts. In law, this may or may not be true. What's true in California may not hold in Massachusetts law. So you can pick the specific ones, or you can select courts. You can take your choice. You can pick any combination to get an idea. That's all I had. Back to you.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Thank you both for your presentations. I know that I'm going to start using Best Match, and I'm also going to be using the expert function tool, which I have not in the past. So I have some questions, but I thought beforehand, since these demos just happened, does anyone have any questions about the demos or about search in general? Yes, and I'm going to repeat the questions because it's being recorded.
Okay, just briefly, when you search Google Scholar for guinea worm, and then you pare it down to antibiotics, I just missed the step that allows you to pare down and search within the results that you already have.
So the question was, how do you narrow down to antibiotics when you already have guinea worm? How do you kind of juggle the two different search terms?
Search within the results you already have. You just added a new term. That actually is not complicated.
Okay.
No, there's a second component which I was demonstrating there. You pick a particular paper and all the papers that are citing this. You could search within the list of all the papers that are citing this,
Right.
and you click on it. There's a checkbox. If you go back, let me just show it to you,
Okay.
rather than. You look at this. Search within citing articles.
I missed that checkbox.
Right.
Okay.
So that allows you to limit your search only within the articles that are citing this given article, so that the articles that are influenced by this work.
Thank you.
Okay, there's another question.
Okay, great. And I think that might
Yes,
not
it
be
is.
working so great. Yes. Oh, okay. You and then yes.
I missed the step on where you get the list of the experts.
Okay. So we'll demo that.
So there are two different ways to do that. Let's go back and do a query. Well, I can type, I would do much better. You just did a query. You look at the search results. In some of the search results, you see some of the authors are linked. You can click on them. They take you to their area.
Does that answer your question?
And then you can click on their interests. There's a second component. There's a search box, which you can get to also by, this is we had profiles, not your profiles, but you can go to profiles. You can search anything you want on profiles as well. Once you get to a profile, you can search for more.
Great. And I think also the wonderful thing about this session being recorded is that we can kind of go back and press slow-mo and figure out how these things happen. Yes. So any questions about demo stuff we might want to
This is actually a little bit about sort of the technology behind it a little bit, and wondering, so my understanding is PubMed searches mainly authors, metadata, the abstracts, but not the full text. Is that correct? And does Google Scholar use full text even when it's behind a paywall?
So the question I'm going to repeat again for the recording is, what is the kind of raw material that these different searches are scraping, scrolling? I don't know what the right tech term is, but indexing through. So making sure that you guys speak maybe into the mic that's working. Do you want each one to answer that question so that, because I think we're all curious to know.
You can go ahead, that's fine.
All right. Essentially, you were right at what is indexed in PubMed, okay? Then you click to get the whole article, okay? And I doubt that's going to change anytime soon for reasons I won't get into. It's complicated enough as it is, okay? But on the other hand, it is a heck of a lot easier to get the full text of the article today than it was even a couple of years ago.
I don't know. Do you want to speak into the mic? This one? I think this one.
Share this microphone. Yes, Scholar does index full text, including behind paywall.
Any other questions? Yes, in the back. Yes, you.
Is there search. So I saw entitled colon and then a term, and I saw a label colon and then a search term. Is there some way of me getting a whole list of the things that I can use the word, the plainer colon and then my term?
So, and I'm sorry to do this torturous thing of repeating the questions. So your question is whether you can capture multiple search terms with one search?
No.
Is there a list of those
Is there a
search
list?
terms? In
It-
other words, entitled, label,
Okay.
define.
Okay, I know in PubMed there are, so the question is how to link together different aspects of a search for different aspects of the research, like a title, an author name. Rob, I'm going to kick that to you first to say something about PubMed. That kind of goes back to the JO thing about, that's my favorite thing, yeah.
Well, I'm going to say what...
Oh.
Let's try. Okay. Believe it or not, we are encouraging people these days not to use the typical librarian terms, Boolean searches and all those sorts of things. We're actually encouraging people to put natural language in there, what they want, okay? It often works just as well, okay, because of the changes that we've made over the last couple of years. So I'm not going to get into the details of if, and, but, and the kind of things that you like so
Wow,
much, okay?
Boolean is out.
Well, Boolean will always remain because we have to serve librarians all over the world. But the fact is that natural language, in most cases, not all, actually works better now in PubMed.
Does that mean I could search if I wanted to for, the question is like an author and an area? How would you search like how would you search for like an author in PubMed then? Would you say?
I would just say, you put in Logan RA, and you'll discover everything that right away. Everything I publish that's in PubMed, okay? Or if you want to discover, for example, all the research that's done by the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in a particular area, you just type in University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, cardiovascular research.
Oh, wow.
That's actually easier.
Wow, that's great. Unless, is it very different in your search, or were you going to say a similar thing? Only because
No,
there's a
the
lot of
question
hands?
was, is there a list someplace? If I understood the question correctly, yes, there is a list some places on Google Help, which virtually nobody reads.
Same question.
Right, and it's usually you don't need, the reason why Untitled appeared there was when you do alert queries, your alerts are searching over a very small corpus, stuff that was published in the last some time period. There, your matches will not be always the ones you want. They will be matches, but they won't all be the ones you want. They may not be relevant. So that's a help for you to create a search that looks like the one that just works for you on the entire corpus.
And I forgot to mention, but it's worth mentioning, there are tutorials of PubMed that are inside of PubMed, tutorials that are interactive that explain all these things, okay?
So I'm sorry, I'm going to sneak in a question here of my own, and then it'll be the only one I ask, I think, given time and given how many hands I see. But these days we see a lot of it written about fake news and things like that. Is there any way to protect against articles that might not be appropriate scholarly articles entering? How do you guys make sure that entering your databases, how do you make sure that that stuff doesn't get in?
Scholar doesn't cover news. Now, the different way to ask your question is, can I make sure that articles that describe incorrect science are not included? No. If I had that, I would have many other things that I could do.
Is there anything that we can do when using the search to protect against referring to?
You should not be saying them. Because what we try to do is to rank things as well as a researcher would. There are components that as researchers we have used for years to figure out what we want to read. Even, Google Scholar or any other search service notwithstanding. You use the same criteria, you'll often be able to find out what the sources of quality usually are. It's usually who wrote it, where it appeared, which affiliations these things are, and what other people have said about it. That's how we have always used, and that's the mechanism that you would use to trust any information that you find anywhere.
Rob, did you want to add anything?
I'll try. there's a procedure that the NLM has, that we have a team of outside people that come in 4 times a year, and that team decides what journals are indexed, okay? Well, we don't make those decisions unilaterally, that team does. They use criteria and standards which are published. The major criteria is the editorial independence of people making decisions. PubMed is comprehensive, but it's not exhaustive. There are many medical journals that are not in there. The reason they're not in there, they didn't qualify, okay?
Interesting.
So that's the quality control built in. But the second thing is, and again, let me refer to Retraction Watch and Ivan Oransky et al.'s work. Because of that work, and work that I very much support, most journals now are very quick to talk about if something has been retracted or something's under review. It'll say so directly in the site. And it'll say so pretty quickly these days, okay, for the very reason that it would be embarrassing for it to be all over a Retraction Watch for months and not have shown up in PubMed.
Awesome. There are a lot of hands here. So yes, in the front.
Or trying to figure out conflicts of interest from papers for an individual researcher is a very tedious task. So I'm wondering, going through all the papers, are there any sort of tricks or any sort of like PubMed resources that actually have a central database of certain fields? I mean, I know there are some in pharma, but or any search terms that would make that a less onerous task.
So the question is, it is time consuming to open every paper and see the conflicts of interest, but is there a shortcut in any way? Any tricks?
The truth is, I don't know of one, okay? Now, if there is one, I don't know of it. There very well might be, but I've never been asked that before. It's never come up. What I do know is, similar to what I said, that the kind of information that's now required by major journals, the journals we index at the end of articles, is far more complete than it used to be, and that's standardized.
So maybe that's a wish list thing. Is there anything in Google Scholar that, in terms of, no, okay. So something that we're all concerned about, I think, for sure. Yes.
Yes, an early predecessor of Medline and PubMed had the world's greatest name, Grateful Med. Any chance that you will resurrect Grateful Med's name?
So we have a request to resurrect Grateful Med, which was a predecessor of Medline. Rob,
I know a couple of NLM officials who are now retired that keep very closely Jerry Garcia's letter thanking them for Grateful Med, okay? Someone showed it to him, and he and a couple of other members of the band wrote and said how elated they were and how honored as well. Also, I'll tell you who also loved that title was Steve Jobs. He absolutely adored it. But anyway, is it going to come back? I don't know.
we could get a petition going, people in this room. Yes.
Yes, I wonder when you said that one should search by natural language nowadays. Before, I was taught that you have to use mesh terms. Is it quite ingrained now to search with mesh terms?
Well, again...
And sorry, let me repeat the question.
Yeah, please do.
Because I have a question to add to it. The question is, you are asking whether natural language is even preferred to mesh terms.
Yes.
And my question is, what's a mesh term? 'Cause I don't know.
The mesh term is medical subject headings. Okay, I referred to it during my talk.
Okay.
Those were the list of terms at the bottom of the page that I scrolled to, had so much trouble scrolling to. Okay, mesh terms are terms that we developed to index and organize the medical literature. In some cases, we started doing that 40 years ago. The reason why they're so convenient is, but the best way to search on mesh is, again, in PubMed, select from the drop-down menu, mesh, rather than PubMed, then put the term in, okay? It's that simple, okay? That works much better, okay? If you, but it's true, if you search in PubMed, put in a mesh term, it'll search well, but the truth is that if you put in, for example, if you put in cardiovascular disease, which is a mesh term, if you put in heart disease, which is not, okay, you would still get the same thing. So again, increasingly, the use of natural language, it will never, it works reasonably well, okay? But mesh terms are very good. and highly recommended searches if you're interested in essentially deep dive into a particular topic.
Great. And I should have clarified, I remembered the mesh terms being at the bottom of the page. I just missed the acronym, so thanks for that. Okay, we have two hands, maybe tentatively in the back. Yes.
I just got a question. Is there any way to search images on PubMed or open access images?
So that's a great question. I have a similar one. Is there a way to search images on either of your search tools?
Are you searching for images using scientific terms?
Yes.
Does Google Images image search not work for you?
Well, also, do you know which ones you're allowed to use and which ones you're not allowed to use?
Can you give an example of a term that you might search?
If I'm looking at a certain pathway or something.
Okay.
Which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
not, but I don't know whether I can use it if it's from a journal, you know, I mean,
So,
because they're listed as open access and PubMed, I didn't know if there were ones you use.
So the question you asked was open access or whether you're allowed to use, which are not actually the same thing. Google Images does have a Creative Commons option. So you can restrict to the set of images that have Creative Commons licenses of different types in terms of reuse. Open access is a far broader category. And Google Images, since it is dealing with images of every kind, doesn't think as much in terms of openness of access. It assumes everything is open.
So I think we have time for one last question. I see one hand in the back. Yes.
One of my favorite Google Scholar things is the see all 7 versions, because then you can usually find the full text version not behind a paywall.
Mhm.
Is there a shortcut to that, where you could just, within your search, ask it to find you a full text?
So I'm going to repeat the question. It was interesting. So you're saying with Google Scholar, it gives you all 7 versions, let's say, as a link out from a returned search response. And your question is there a way to just skip directly to that?
The ultimate goal you said was you wanted to find a version to read, right? If there is a version to read, it will appear on the right-hand side in the search result right there. As in, you don't actually have to click to all 11 versions. So that's the part we try to do. If there's a version that you can read anyway, it could be open, it could be available to you as a part of your affiliation. Your library may have licensed it for you. Any which way, if it is available, we work with publishers to make that possible. We work with libraries to make that possible. So,
Rob, do you want to add one more?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about something that you mentioned a few minutes ago. Interestingly enough, I was once at an AHCJ meeting in Atlanta, and President Carter and Mrs. Carter spoke at that meeting. And afterwards, I attended essentially an informal reception with them there. And they asked me whether or not there was anything in our services about guinea worm disease. And I did a search on Medline Plus at that time. This was, again, several years ago. And it turned out that that was a term that had a full health topic page. And I was able to show them how to link to the latest research that was done that all over the world, and all the clinical trials that were going on around the world, and also all the websites that appeared in many other places that were evidence-based. And one of the most emotional things I ever saw, Mrs. Carter cried, okay, as I began showing it to her. And she apparently did not know that those sorts of things existed, but they were very grateful. By the way, in case you did not know, their foundation has almost eliminated that disease around the world, the work they've done over the past 30 years.
I think that's kind of a great place to end it. And so we've heard about the Grateful Dead using these resources, and some presidents or presidential couples using it. So I think that's a great place to end. And feel free to ask questions coming up. And let's give them a big applause for that great presentation. Thank you.